Well, okay. I forgot to say a couple things at the beginning. I was so excited to get things started, but I have to say these things. Number one, what you heard tonight is a public service. A public service. These four experts are volunteers. No one has paid them a penny for any of the work that you saw tonight. No one has ever paid them a penny for any of the work that they've been doing, as you well know, to date on shale gas issues in New York State. So it's wonderful that Cornell could give us this facility for the evening. It's great that you could come to listen to them, but we're not done, obviously, because now we head into what should be an even more part of the more interesting part of the session, which is the opportunity for you to ask questions of them. So I'm going to ask them to come forward. I'm going to sit here, and let me tell you how the questions are going to work. I'm the moderator, and I said this is my house, so it's my rules. So rule number one, only one question per person. Rule number two, the question has to be short, sweet, and topical. Rule number three, no speeches. They did the talking, you do the listening, you do the questioning, they do the answering. That's the way it works. So let's start over here. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know who to pose this to, but given what one of you said about the importance of reserves to these energy companies, and given the information that we've just seen about the Marcellus Shale in New York, what's the consequence of that?
Luke. I guess I was the one that was talking about the reserves. The consequence of that is that if you want to add a lot to reserves, so you please Wall Street, boost your stock price, you go to a place where you have a good chance of finding reserves. And from what you saw, I think it's pretty clear that the chance of finding a lot of reserves in New York is not very great.
Next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe McKiernan from Windsor and Broome County, where you've pointed out that we're still the sacrifice area, and we're sitting here very worried. So to all of you, what would you advise all of us who have been fighting against fracking? Should we continue, or are you advising that we're giving up? Thanks.
Keep fighting.
Keep fighting.
I think if I may, I think Lou spelled it out pretty nicely. The reason why is that almost really wherever you are, is that you're vulnerable to poorly regulated collateral damage from coming out of the gas field, whether it's drill cuttings to a landfill, frack waste on the road. You're all vulnerable to that, irrespective of whether there's any drilling, much less production. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. In your county, if you live, or township, if you live in a township that's in, Jerry's hit zone, then you really need to get things together, because it's unlikely that the DEC regs as written are going to protect your township. If they want, for instance, they don't even protect the roads. They're not empowered by law to protect. So it's up to you to take care of that. Thank you.
Yes, this is probably for Lou or Chip. About 2 weeks ago, I saw a news release that said that out in California, the state was going to open up about 30 stations very soon to the general public where they would be selling biomethane. And this is natural gas that's produced from sewage plants, from cow manure, from other organic sources. So I'd like to know, is this actually a viable source of energy for the future?
A big source, no. A little bit, yes. A serious problem, yes, because as Tony and his colleague John Howarth has pointed out, methane leaks from various sources are serious problems. Now, the work that John Howarth did was mainly methane going to power plants, but what we've seen is far more areas where methane leaks along transmission lines, compression stations, and things like that. You've got 100 times the global warming impact from methane during the first 20 years after it's released compared to carbon dioxide. So unless those systems are really tight, probably better to flare it or to burn it to make sure that it's not methane going up into the air.
Next.
Evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for the presentation. Craig Stevens in Susquehanna County. This is probably for Lou and Chip. I don't know if you're aware, but in the last few months, many of our biggest proponents of natural gas drilling are the people that were getting royalty checks. They're not getting royalty checks. We're within 5 years, and some of them are getting billing statements instead of checks. A few of them came forward and said that when they called to have a third-party accounting done, it was refused, and this is by all the companies across the board. So they said publicly they called the Federal Trade Commission. Just from you two, I'd like to hear what happens when the Federal Trade Commission gets involved in this, finding out that the gas drilling company that's the partner is refusing to release the information to show that they properly paid their landowning partner. Thank you.
Well, that was probably yours, Lou, but the short answer is next to nothing. I mean, no, I mean, seriously, what they're going to have to do, it depends on what kind of interest. If they had a working interest or an overriding royalty interest. But the fact is that at a practical matter, they would have to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, with a forensic accountant and sue the company to actually get the data. I mean, they would force them to get the data. And I don't think the FTC, I mean, I don't think the feds would get involved in that.
First of all, cheating on royalties is not new. That's been around for a long time. Secondly, the biggest companies have difficulty protecting themselves with layers of intermediate companies. But the smaller companies will almost always have separate corporate entities for each well, for each gathering system, for everything. So your ability to get at them is not that great. You're going to be suing a company that might own one well.
I would like to add my thanks to each and every one of you for your time, your energy, your travel. Thank you so much for being here. Chip, you talked about surface restrictions. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Has there been any mapping of that?
Well, Karen has mapped it. Chris Kale's mapped it. The fact is that as a practical matter, well, the short answer is not much. I mean, the numbers I showed you were just theoretical. What happened or what should happen is that a township, if they do a comprehensive plan, the part of it would be a comprehensive land plan, and in that comprehensive plan, and Middlefield did this actually, is that you could take those the existing proposed regulations and you could just map it. You map it over the known the areas that would be protected, the setbacks that would be addressed. So yeah, it's not it's not trivial. Karen, the frac tracker, could explain how it would work. But yeah, that can be done. But typically, it would be done on a local initiative. The state has no resources to do that. So at the township level, you could do that, and then obviously it would show you how many wells could be drilled and it'd show you what kind of impact there would be. And that would be part of a comprehensive land plan. Yeah.
Just keep in mind that the regulations are not finalized, so it's a state of flux, and you don't really know where it's going to end up. So that's another reason to keep the pressure on the DEC to make sure that the regulations are tightened even further than what they are, because many of those things are way too close to people and water sources.
Sandy Frankel from Monroe County, former supervisor of the town of Brighton. I'm interested to know, one, have you had an opportunity to make this presentation to Governor Cuomo and his staff?
Yes, we're meeting with him in the morning. Thank you.
Oh, good. No, huh? I know I heard you on Liz Benjamin's program where you said that program was how you were speaking to the governor.
I just go on TV so I can talk to Cuomo. Well, if I may, that is, of course, that's kind of a problem. But let me say, to put it in context, the government, or at some levels of the government, at the DEC, they know this. What Lou knows, they know. There's some people at the DEC know what Lou knows. It's buried down deep in the rabbit warrens of the DEC. There are some people that know what Jerry Acton knows. I mean, that's kind of the catch about all this. It's not that they're unmindful of this information.
But just to add to that, what was it, 6 months to a year ago, Tony and several people, Sandra Steingraber, John Howarth, myself, a number of others, asked for a meeting. We repeatedly asked for a meeting to talk to him, and he wouldn't do it.
Well, let me see if I can help. I can't promise anything, but the lieutenant governor lives in our community. So I'll see if we can get a door open.
Thank you.
Beyond that, one concern I have for our area is the issue of disposal and treatment of waste products, because we're not a likely area for drilling, but we are a potential for what happens to the materials used on the roads and wastewater, especially because we have rivers, we have Lake Ontario, we've got tremendous positive water resources that have the potential for contamination. So how can we do more to focus on that aspect of this, given the fact that much of the state isn't going to be likely a gas-producing area?
If I may, and you know, I've written about this a lot. The short answer is, unfortunately, you're going to have to address this at the county level and at the township level, vis-a-vis the collateral damage, the waste disposal. As Lou pointed out, they literally export this waste out of Pennsylvania to Ohio to get rid of it. They export it, obviously, to a state just north of Pennsylvania to get rid of it as well. And the reason why is because it's legal in the state that's north of Pennsylvania to do this. And as you may, if you've read my blog, you'll know that it's not legal other places. You can't take stuff that's, you know, radioactive toxic flowback out of a horizontal shale well in Texas and spread it on a road, because it's against state law. You can't take drill cuttings and just dump them out on a farm field. You can't take it. You can't take frack waste and take it to a municipal treatment plant and pretend that they can treat it, because it's against state law. But it's not against state law in Texas.
In New York.
So, I mean, in New York, the state north of Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
But so the first, you'd have to actually address it at the state level. Obviously, and secondly, if in fact Lou doesn't get that meeting with Cuomo, then you have to do something at the county and the township level.
And some of our towns have adopted bans, but it's spotty.
Yeah, well, again, it should be addressed at the state level, but it hasn't been.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dwayne Wilder, Rochester, New York, librarian of the Frankfurt, Genesee Library. Lou, I wanted to know if you could cite the regulatory basis for the test horizontal fracking wells that you mentioned. I was astounded to hear that we've been fracked.
Oh, we've been fracked over and over again, but the regulations currently allow fracks of 80,000 gallons. The DEC has approved some on their own with no statutory basis up to about 300,000 gallons. But most of the fracks that have been done in the state have been down in the 80,000. Those 3 tests in Otsego County that I mentioned were well under 80,000. They were vertical wells, so they were tests around the well bore to see how much gas would come out, and not much came out.
So I misunderstood that they were horizontal fracks.
You can drill horizontal wells. You can frack horizontal wells as long as you only use 80,000 gallons, which means it's not really worth drilling a horizontal well if that's all you can use. Mm-hmm. Horizontal wells take millions of gallons to frack. But you could legally drill a horizontal well, and there are horizontal wells into conventional reservoirs in New York State. and you can drill vertical wells and frack today.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Sullivan County, the River Reporter in Sullivan County, where 5 towns have passed bans on fracking, and 3 towns have passed resolutions inviting fracking. So, but you said there were major companies that had looked at various counties and are still interested in them. Is anybody interested in drilling Sullivan County?
I didn't see any.
Thank you.
Evening. I'm from southern Oneida County, which I gather is getting pretty close to the deadline to the north. But I'm concerned about the previous question about disposal. And I'm wondering what geological conditions are propitious for disposal wells and what kind of regulatory constraints may exist for drilling disposal wells. And do we know of any prospecting that's active in this area?
Well, they certainly would like to have disposal wells. There are only about 6 existing disposal wells, and they're pretty much at capacity. The companies have particular purposes for them. Lou was talking about the Trenton Black River wells, which would be very suitable for disposal. In fact, I think it was Chesapeake up in Cayuga Lake, which tried to turn one of the horizontal wells to the Trenton Black River into a disposal well, and they were eventually prevented by the community resistance. But yes, there are several hundred Trenton Black River wells that are running out of gas, and they're all potential disposal wells.
That may be the next thing that we start hearing about as an issue revolved around this. It was on that last chart. So far, there hasn't been much, but people may start looking as those old played out Trenton Black River wells as a moneymaker to take frack waste from other places.
Thanks again, fellows.
Brad McFall here in Ithaca, a member of JPIC, Justice, Peace, Integrity of Creation. This is for Jerry. I perhaps read one of the maps wrong, maybe not. I was wondering if you might comment on the one town in western Pennsylvania that had a 4.5 productivity, which seemed a little different than the trend, but probably wouldn't have made a difference.
Oh, the orange one over
Yes.
there? Yeah. There were only 3 wells there. One was a little bit above 4.7, and one was 1.2. And you take the median doesn't work real well there because it biases it up. So I probably should have left that off. That's an anomaly.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Irene Weiser from here in Tompkins County. And this is a little bit Jerry and a little bit Lou, so you guys can figure out who should answer. But Jerry, on your maps, I seem to recall that in Pennsylvania, in some of the northern tier counties, as they moved west, even though the depth and the thickness weren't there, there was a lot of drilling that went on in some of those counties. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, Tioga drilled a lot of wells.
So,
well, you saw the mass even on the MCOR thing where it wasn't just the sweet spot, that whole region. But I think my interpretation of that, and you guys back me up, is
so that's where I want to go.
That's the consolidation. But you know, when I was having this conversation with my wife, I said, it looks like there was a feeding frenzy up there, and you know, it didn't play out very well. And now they're smarter and they concentrated in the sweet spot area.
Yeah. So I mean, do we still have to worry about that kind of craziness happening here, even though the depth and the thickness say it's not here?
If I may, Lou, I want to let Lou finish this, but I think I see where you're going with this. I think what that was that was a financially driven frenzy. I mean, drilling those. I think the implication is if they could go out and drill a bunch of dud wells, then what's the percentage would become drilling a bunch of dud wells here? But I don't think that's. I think that was driven under economic circumstances, I don't think that would repeat itself, because I think some of that could have been just totally speculative drilling.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things in play here. One is that I think a lot of people in the industry believe the hype that this was ubiquitous, that the shale gas was everywhere. If you drilled a well, you were going to get some. And if you looked at the time staging of Jerry's earliest slides of how the wells were drilled in Pennsylvania, initially it was a shotgun all over, and then fewer in those outlying areas and moving toward that hot spot, and then fewer and more in the hot spot. So it was a learning curve. People tried everywhere, and it narrowed it down.
I don't think that'll repeat itself after they watch Jerry on YouTube. Coming soon to a channel near you.
I'm going to have to hire some self-protection.
Okay, hold off on your next question for about 10 seconds. We need a battery change. Okay.
Michelle Bamberger from Ithaca. So we've heard a lot about the shale gas potential in the Marcellus, but I'd like to know your thoughts from all of you. What about the shale gas potential of the Utica in New York? Do we know anything about that?
Yeah, we know a lot about it. I think the fact is that, like Lou showed, the Utica has been tested mainly by going to the Trenton Black River more extensively in New York State than it has in northern Pennsylvania in terms of the well logging. And like he said, so it's all those all those wells were logged. And I'm going to repeat all this because that's a really good question, and that's sort of always comes up. What about the Utica? I'll back up in a second and say, first of all, the Utica in New York State doesn't have as much carbon content as the Marcellus. That Union Springs interval of the Marcellus trumps the Utica in New York State, so far as we know. And so, and the fact is that data, that information is known, because when they, like, I'm going to repeat what Lou said. When those wells are drilled, they get those cuttings back, and those cuttings are it's like a broken up core section of the wells. They see the rock. When they get those cuttings back, when they drill that well, if they hit gas, and if they hit a gas formation going through the Utica to the Trenton Black River, it's going to kick that mud back up. That's what the blowout preventer is for, is to keep that mud from being blown back out of that well coming up. When they find the Eagle Ford in South Texas, they know they hit it because of that mud kick. Now, look at all those wells that Lou showed. They've gone through that, and even without logging them, even before running the gamma ray log, they've got that drilling log. If that Utica was gas rich, if it was overpressurized, it would kick that mud right back up, and they'd know it. And if they wanted it, they'd come back into this state, and they'd have apps in that queue right now. That's what I know about the Utica.
A couple more things. Number one, the only company that I saw that put in permits for Utica was Norse, and they had, as far as I could tell, very little knowledge about Utica because they weren't drilling down to the Trenton Black River. They were drilling to the sandstones that were above the Utica. Number one. Number two, we talked about thermal maturity and being overcooked or overmature. If the Marcellus up here is overcooked, then the Utica was down there longer because it was deposited first, and it's hotter. So if the Marcellus is overcooked, Utica is overcooked. So there's a whole section of New York where that probably applies on the eastern side, where the Utica happens to be very thick. So, but again, you had those Delaware County wells with nobody going back to Delaware County. That was probably the best test of the Utica that I saw. Those companies didn't go back. The ones that did went right up against the Pennsylvania border with Marcellus permits.
Good, thank you. Next question.
John Kesich, Tioga County, Pennsylvania. And I was wondering if any of you would care to comment on something that Scott Blauwelt, who was Safety and Environmental Officer for East Resources, said back in 2009 when at a public forum I asked him, would your company, as a good environmental steward, and that's what they touted themselves as, would your company be willing to sign on an open letter to Congress asking them to rescind all oil and gas exemptions to environmental regulations? What he said was, we couldn't do that. And when I asked him why not, he said, we just couldn't do that. So I'd like to make two observations before you answer. First, I only asked about regulatory exemptions. I did not ask about tax breaks or subsidies. And second, my interpretation is that this industry cannot operate safely, responsibly, and fairly and turn a profit. Thank you.
I'm not going to touch that. Of course we can't. Thank you. Thanks for coming out and pointing that out. No comment.
Hi, I'm Carol Chalk. I'm on the Tompkins County Legislature. I'll just shout out to the chair of our legislature, Martha Robertson, I saw. Are there others? Okay, online now. Okay, you can introduce yourself. And a few of my constituents, one of whom is Barbara Lifton, our assemblywoman, who I saw in the audience there. But I'll claim there's my constituent. Interesting to hear, Chip, when you talked about the various factors, it's interesting to see why the industry fought so hard for every single element in the EIS, those setbacks, and how important it was that we were out here commenting on every single one. So a shout out to all of us so far. And then to what extent, some of this got answered two people ago, but to what extent is the industry aware and performing the same kind of analysis that either Jerry, that Brian are doing? To what extent do they do it? And to what extent, why can't they use their experience from other shales to tell them more so they would know all of this ahead of time and not come into all our towns to test?
You saw those, I think it was 6 charts that I put up that showed a slight sliver around southern tier into Delaware. Those were all by those companies. They know it. Those charts were done a number of years ago. They know it.
The other part of I think it was a question, is that why do you hear all this PR? If there's nothing here, so to speak. And I think that, there's the fact is that what you're hearing is you're hearing literally from the oil and gas company. You're hearing public relations,
investor relations.
So in other words, you're hearing you're hearing the lobbyists, you're hearing their advocates, but you're not hearing from their systems engineers. You're not hearing from their geologists. That work for the companies. So the only way you can differentiate or separate the rhetoric, shall we call it, and the reality is those well permits. They will put their money where their mouth is, where those well permit applications. The rest of it beyond that, spatially, geographically, is, what was that word? Rhetoric.
Okay, thanks.
Next question.
Did I understand correctly that it's enough to just drill vertically through the Marcellus to test it, that you don't have to drill a horizontal well to really find out what it's going to produce? Because all those numbers you cited were just for vertical wells. So how do we know that a horizontal well wouldn't have a much better, much higher production?
If those volumes were, most of those tests are vertical because that's the cheap way to do the test. but those volumes that they picked up were so tiny that translating that into a horizontal wouldn't do it. There's just not enough.
Yeah, the short answer is, effectively all test wells are vertical. But to repeat what Lou just said, is that you get enough information through the drilling log, through the mud log, through the wireline log, and from those test fracs to get a sense of how much gas that formation is going to produce. The fact that they didn't go horizontal and frack it doesn't matter. I mean, they're a lot smarter than that. They have more than enough information from those wells.
Just to add to that, if they saw enough in the vertical test and the frac and the vertical test, they would back up about 500 feet, turn the bit, and go out horizontally and do a horizontal well. Nobody did that. Excuse me, nobody did that.
Okay. And I know we're only supposed to ask one, but I have a really quick one. Could the reason they haven't been issuing applying for permits be because of the moratorium?
Probably is, because all of those permits that I showed, the applications went in really before the moratorium went into effect. There's nothing to stop them from putting in the permits now.
No, but why would they? So are you concluding too much from their lack of permits? Are you concluding too much about their lack of interest from their lack of permits?
No.
No,
No, we're not.
No.
Thank you for asking.
The lack of
the number. Again, if I may, Lewis. You don't mind if I call you Lewis, do you? What we're talking about is the spatial extent of drilling, the drillable area in New York, and whether there's 400 permits or those baker's dozen that he showed. It's the location that counts. And the location has been invariant, more or less, since before the moratorium.
Yeah, I fully expect that if the moratorium is over, if somehow the DEC permits fracking, you'll see a lot of permits, but you'll see them in that area.
And those 5 XTO permits were done in the last year or so. So those were done based on all the experience they've had in Pennsylvania.
Right. They were done in Feb. That's a really good point, Brian. They were done in February of this year. Yeah, those are brand new, fresh permits. Yep. Thanks.
Hi. My question is, earlier you mentioned that in Texas they're not allowed to spread the radioactive brine on the roads because it's illegal. So I just wanted to know, how could we do that here on a state level?
Well, that's not just Texas. There's a lot of states out west you can't do that. What they have a better plan in Texas. They use it to induce earthquakes. Thank you for your question.
No.
Is that all?
Actually, that's right, because what they do in Texas is they put it into injection wells, pump it down under high pressure to get it down deep, out of the way, which happens to now be causing some earthquakes. The other part of the reason that it is done in New York is because the New York Department of Environmental Conservation issues beneficial use permits for spreading this stuff on roads.
Right.
So if you want to stop spreading it on roads, we've got to get the legislature to tell the DEC, make it illegal to spread brine on roads.
You have to realize in New York that we're operating basically with regulations that were written in 1972. There have been no statewide regulations written since 1986, and the GEIS, the first set of guidelines to drill environmentally safely, there was not a single regulation that was produced from those guidelines.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. So my question really is along the line of economics, and you were saying something about the price of coal versus the price of gas and so on. Now there's all these attempts in New York State to repower electric plants them from coal to natural gas. Lots of attempts to liquefy it, ship it abroad. My understanding is in China, the price is something around 15 or a little more. So there's a lot of pressure on to build up our dependency on natural gas and off of coal. So what comes to mind is sort of at what point, so long as they can get anything out of the ground, at some point it gets expensive enough that it's worth it to them to do it. So I'm trying to kind of grapple with the idea of, as this pressure builds up to possibly bring that price of natural gas up very, very high, say as high as it is in China or something like that, at what point do they start finding it's worth it to drill in some of these less productive areas?
Okay, let me try that, because along the way, when I was working in the industry, I had a few different jobs that involved forecasting prices, and it's a very difficult thing to do with any precision. You can get a pretty good idea that things will get to certain points, but you don't know when they will. There are several factors at play on the price of gas. One is our domestic production, and right now our domestic production is high enough that it's holding the price pretty low. You have international prices that are higher in Europe and higher in Japan and China. Japan is artificially high because of the tsunami impact on their nuclear electricity generation. So they had to scramble to get supplies in and pay whatever they had to pay. There are a few things that mitigate against those high prices, though. Number one is if the U.S. starts exporting, so that to try to get higher prices and drive domestic prices up, there are international producers, Qatar, Russia, that have huge capacity, and they probably are not going to sit back and let the U.S. take the markets away. They will drop their prices to the point where they keep their markets. So I think there's a lid on those high prices that you see in some places by competition from places that can produce more. Number two, the cost of renewables is coming down. It comes down every year, and it's coming down fairly quickly. The cost of drilling gas keeps going up because you keep drilling out the good spots. So the cost of renewables coming down is eventually going to meet the cost of gas going up and put a lid on just how high the price of gas can go. It's a fairly macroeconomic analysis that has to be done of it, but you can say that renewables will put a lid on the gas prices, and our own domestic production has helped to keep it down. Someplace in between, the international market will settle. So sooner or later, they'll all come together.
To some extent,
go ahead, Brian.
When they start drilling in New York, should it ever be allowed, has more to do with the productivity in Pennsylvania than it has to do with the price of gas. As long as they have much better places to drill down in Pennsylvania, they won't be interested in drilling up here regardless of what the price is.
Okay.
That's right. You saw that they have to allocate their money to the best prospects, and there are a lot better prospects than what we have here in New York.
It's getting late, and there's supposed to be a social time after this. There's a lot of good food upstairs, but I know you're interested in hearing a few more, so how about, are there four of you?
More. Yeah.
Four quick ones. Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha Robertson. A question for Tony, because we can't leave Tony out of this. Maybe I can sneak in for anybody to respond first. What is the industry going to say in response to all of this? Yeah, I'd be curious about that. They're already working on the Energy in Depth blog, right? But Tony, you've talked to me about acidification. Is that what's called in the process that they're using in California? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that come into play at all in the East? Is that a process that, I don't know, is promising here if they're using it there? I don't know.
So there's two questions. The industry response already started. When the press release for this event went out, there were automatically responses coming from the usual EID, ANGA, and the usual blogs. So you should read those. Now that you've heard these presentations, I strongly advise you listen to both right-wing and left-wing radio, okay? So you listen to the apologists and you listen to the, whatever it is, whatever you call yourselves, fractivists, and then judge. Acidification is another form of stimulation. To get a fossil fuel out of a rock formation, one thing you can do is frack it. You all know what that means. Sometimes fracking doesn't work. So how else can you do things? So you can wormhole a formation by injecting large quantities of acid into it. What does acid do when it eats into something? It pinholes it, wormholes it. So the whole idea, again, is the same as fracking. You increase the effective permeability. You allow whatever is stored in the rock to more easily get to the well. By fracking, you create new surface area or open up surface area that it was already there, as in the Marcellus. In acidification, you literally eat into the rock and create, think of them as wormholes, create Swiss cheese out of a rock formation. And that doesn't work well in the Marcellus. It doesn't have to work that way. It's planned to be the major form of stimulation in the Monterey Shale, which is Brian, you probably know more about the Monterey than I do, but it's geologically different material.
They frack the Marcellus because it's a very brittle shale, whereas the Monterey is very soft, and it also has a lot of calcite in it, which is what the acid dissolves. So it's whatever technique works best.
And Martha, let me say that if I could vote in this state and if it wasn't a violation of my parole, I would vote for you. So instead, I'll just bribe you. Let me give you a short answer about the industry response. That really, if Jerry was wrong, if Lou was wrong, then the industry, then that map would be full of drilling permits. Moratorium, no moratorium. Josh Fox, no Josh Fox. Sorry, Josh. But that's just the simple reality of it. The degree that we are right is confirmed by the industry itself. They came, they saw, they left.
If I can just say, I hope that doesn't let anybody relax, especially when there's an election next week.
I would just like to add to that, one of my motivations for what I did was to get the truth on the table from the public, not count on industry to tell us this.
My name's Buzz Levine. I'm from the town of Dryden. And Chip, I've heard you say that this kind of information is not to put us at rest, even in the shallower and thinner areas that are not likely to produce much at all, because, as Lou also said tonight, there's wildcatters out there who get satisfy their needs to go to a casino by drilling a well instead. Are we not supposed to fear that those wildcatters are going to come to some of these presumably non-productive areas?
No, I think as long as they can find another sucker to finance the well, they'll drill it. Because it is a lotto thing. So of course they'll. That's what a lot of this wildcatting was how it happened, is they were throwing a dart trying to get lucky. So yeah, they'll come to your town and they'll throw a dart, like they did in Owego, like Carrizo did, and they'll screw up the water, and they'll not poorly plug the well, and then they'll go back to Texas. So yeah, it's up to you to do something about it. Sorry.
So you're saying that you do think that they will find some funding to go do that?
Yeah, of course they will.
Okay, thank you.
My question is about the relationship between unconventional and conventional drilling financially. If they make a lot of money with the unconventional wells and they build all the infrastructure, do they try to plow some of the profits that they make from the unconventional production into nearby conventional wells? Like around here, would they just drill the Trenton Black River nearby and then put it into the pipeline that they built for Marcellus production? Do they do that?
What they will do is take the money that they get, look across all of the prospects that they've got, and allocate it to those. Around here, the Trenton Black River doesn't seem to be doing very well. There are some productive wells, but not a whole lot. And a lot of the tests that you saw that went through the Utica and down to the Black River came up empty. So it doesn't look that great. They were much more successful with it to the west.
The Trenton Black River is a different type of shale play. It's structurally controlled. It occurs along fault zones. So the Trenton Black River is just not porous enough to hold the gas. It's only where the rock breaks up by the faults. So they have to locate the fault zones, and if there are no fault zones, you won't get anything. There's no gas down the
Yeah, but what
Trenton Black
about
River.
Queenston and the Medina?
Well, yeah, that's a sandstone. And that tends to be productive out in the western portion of the state where it's thinner, though.
Yeah, well, my question is just once they built the pipelines, do they plow the money? I mean, do we need to worry about drilling throughout the rest of New York simply because they're making a lot of money down in one sliver of it?
No.
Okay.
Last question, and then the party starts.
All right, so I better be really quick in that case. So I wonder if Chip could comment on energy returned on energy invested. And before you do that, I just want to tell you that you guys may not have gotten paid for this work, but your children and grandchildren are really proud of you.
That's why we're doing it.
Yeah, Lou said that's why we're doing this. The Ne plus ultra of microeconomic analysis is the energy return on energy invested. And back at ARCO, back when I still had a job with them, we did that. That's the kind of analysis we did. What you do is you take different energy systems, wind systems, solar systems, biomass, gas wells, and you would rank them by the amount of energy that you had to put into the system to build it and deploy it, and the amount that you got out. And of course, obviously at the time when I was there, before we had a disagreement of opinions, it was in the late 70s. Solar and whatnot was just not very effective in that regard. So, but what you could do, and this becomes very difficult because remind you have to take the capital expenditure and convert it into an energy equivalent. And good luck. So, but you can in fact do that it would be probably a good thought exercise to do that on these wells. The fact of the matter is for instance, on Jerry's modeling, you get to a point where the return of the gas that you're being under almost any pricing scenario, it's just you get to a point where it's just totally energy inefficient without getting too fancy about how you model it. But yeah, that's the gold standard of determining whether or not a production system is a cost effective, whether it pays for itself. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the Q&A to an end, so let's give an applause one more time for the presenters. And thank you very much also to the videographers and recorders. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Steve. McManus Lounge, first floor, other wing of the building. Don't all mob, but see you up there. Thank you for coming.
Brian, great job. I'm drinking water.